She was certain the woman was she walked to the door, wondering whether this was praying that it was. She had a vague awareness of stopping for more soldiers, these in red and black armor. Then Pedro Niles' audience chamber, Valdez now, or rather whoever had taken the fortress, was changed. The great golden sunburst remained, set in the floor. But all Niles' captured banners, which Valda had kept as if they were his, were gone, and so were the furnishings, except for the plainly carved high-backed chair Nile and then Valda had used, flanked now by two tall, luridly painted screens. One showed a white-crested black bird of prey with a cruel beak, its white-tipped wings spread wide. The other a black-spotted yellow cat, with one paw on a dead deer-like creature half its size, with long straight horns and white stripes. There were a number of people in the room, but that was all she had time to notice before a sharp-faced woman in blue robes stepped forward, one side of her head shaved, and the remaining hair in a long brown braid that hung in front of her right shoulder. Her blue eyes, full of contempt, could have done for the eagles or the cats. "You are in the presence of the High Lady Suroth, who leads those who come before and succors the return," she intoned, in that same slurring accent. Without warning, the hook-nosed officer seized the back of Morghez's neck and bore her down prostrate beside him. Stunned, not least because the breath was knocked out of her, she saw him kiss the floor. "Release her, Elbar," another woman drawled angrily. "The Queen of Andor is not to be treated so." The man, Elbar, rose as far as his knees, head bent. "I abase myself, High Lady. I beg forgiveness." His voice was as cold and flat as that accent allowed. "I have small forgiveness for this, Elbar." Morghez looked up. Suroth took her aback. The sides of her head were shaved, leaving a glossy black crest across the top of her head, and a mane that flowed down her back. "Perhaps when you are punished. Report yourself now. Leave me. Go." A sweeping gesture flashed fingernails at least an inch long, the first two on each hand a glistening blue. Elbar bowed on his knees, then rose smoothly, backing away through the door. For the first time, Morghez realized none of the other soldiers had followed them in. She realized something else as well. He gave her one final glance before he vanished, and instead of flickering resentment for the one who had caused his punishment, he considered. There would be no punishment. The entire exchange had been arranged beforehand. Suroth swept toward Morghez, carefully holding her pale blue robe to keep her skirts exposed. Snow white, with hundreds of tiny pleats. Embroidered vines and lush red and yellow flowers spread across the robe. For all her sweeping, Morghez noticed the woman did not reach her until she had regained her feet on her own. "You are unharmed?" Suroth asked. "If you are harmed, I will double his punishment." Morghez brushed at her dress, so she would not have to look at the false smile that never touched the woman's eyes. She took the opportunity to look around the room. 4 men and 4 women.
Hey, Bastian, how you doing,
all
bro?
young and more
I'm
than
just
good-looking. All
breaking
wearing.
some up.
She jerked her eyes away.
After I break it up, I'll do a dab.
Transparent. At the far sides of the screens, 2 more pairs of women knelt, one of each in the gray dress, one in the blue embroidered by lightning, bound by the silvery leash from wrist to neck. Morghez was not close enough to say for sure, but she had the sick-making certainty that the gray-clad women could channel. "I'm quite all right, thank..." A huge reddish-brown shape lay sprawled on the floor, a heap of tanned cowskins, perhaps. Then it heaved. "What is that?" She managed not to gape, but the question popped from her tongue before she could stop it. "You admire my leopard?" Suroth swept away a good deal quicker than she had come. The enormous shape raised a great round head for her to stroke it under the chin with a knuckle. The creature put Morghez in mind of a bear, though it was easily half again as big as the largest bear she'd ever
Hell yeah.
come up, and hairless to boot, with
They're not
wings
going
as
too
thick
bad.
and heavy ridges surrounding its eyes.
We better than neighbors should learn some respect.
He foiled the first attempt to kill
These
the
ones
dinosaur
on,
here when he was only a
yeah,
quarter
this side of us,
There
or
was
me,
no
on
affection
my
in the woman's
right
eyes.
hand.
The
Them ones are cool.
Lopar's lips
Now these ones
peeled
over
back to
here,
reveal thick-pointed
on the other
teeth she
hand,
stroked. Its forepaws flexed,
they had music
claws
playing to where we could
shaping
hear it
and
inside, and
from 6 long toes on each.
like from
And began
11
to
o'clock
purr,
till
a bass rumble
they just
picked
barely
up
turned
her
it off.
Remarkable, Borghese said faintly. True name day? How many attempts had there been to kill this woman that she could speak of the first so casually? The Lopar whined briefly.
I'm not doing
when
too
Suroff
bad.
lifted, but quickly settled
Other than
its
that,
head on its
about to
paws.
do a dab and be
Disconcertingly,
doing a lot
his
better.
eyes did not follow her, but settled mainly on Borghese, now and then flicking toward the door or the narrow alley-slit window. Of course, however loyal a Lopar, it cannot reach. No affection touched Suroff's voice now. Huron Fusion could slay 100 assassins before Alman Daragal blinked his eye. At the mention of each name, Dorothy blue-clad twitched her silvery leash, and the woman at the other end doubled herself as the one in the corridor had.
Well, we yelled at them before, like, well, we tried talking to them nice because they're not inside, they're outside under like a little patio outside, and they have one of those big ass karaoke type speakers that they have blasting like most of the night from like before it gets dark until like I said, like just not too long ago.
Should be able to take that leash and strangle.
And we can hear from here and them singing along with it, just getting louder and louder. And let me do this real quick.
Borghese wondered if she dared ask for a chair. That is very interesting. But I do not think you asked me.
Yeah, so we after the night before and it's worked, and
Suroff stared at
we've had to go in there before and like raise our voices a little bit just because.
Vera, the sharp-faced woman who had her head shaved, barked suddenly.
Just because you can't, they couldn't hear you over how loud the music was. And then they copped an attitude at this one time. Oh, they're bumping their gums, talking shit to us.
Behind the tall screen painted with the eagle, and in moments reappeared bearing a silver tray.
They got bad enough to where our cool neighbors over here
before Suroff, she bowed her dark
were actually out
the tray, so her offering stood
having our back, making sure that nothing happened. At least nothing like stupid happened with them doing towards us.
Would have stormed off in a dudgeon.
So we tried to talk to them countless times. It ends up just being a younger cats out there, and just start bumping their gums and thinking they're hard and all that. And yeah, it just leads to a big old thing like that.
Blacker than any tea,
Which
the liquid was also
I try not to get upset like that because that shit's not good for my blood pressure. When I get upset like that and the irritation with them,
Yet I will be brief at this first.
It doesn't number sometimes.
Ishan returned to reclaim what was stolen from the heirs of the High King, Arthur Pendrag Tunral. Pleasure over the cat became a different pleasure in her voice, both expectation and certainty, and she watched Borghese's face closely. Borghese could not take her eyes away. What was ours will be ours again. In truth,
and usually it's
a thief gains no ownership.
We're on the outnumbered part because it's just me and my brother, and usually with them over there, when they have the music playing loud like they are, they're usually like 4 to 6 deep there.
Had he lived in rebellion against the crystal throne and not even of the blood,
we'll still go over there and fucking talk shit to him, tell him what's up about showing some respect about it being as late as it is to turn that shit down, but
The bandits will be eradicated.
Not young like I used to be. Not the best for my health.
Now I begin in this Amadisia. Soon all will kneel to the Empress, may she live forever, the direct descendant of the great Arthur. If the serving woman had not gone with the tray, Morghese would have put her cup back. No tremor disturbed the dark surface of the calf, but much of what the woman spouted was meaningless to her. Empress? Seanchan? There had been wild rumors a year or more ago about Arthur Hawkwing's armies come back from across the Arath Ocean, but only the most credulous could have believed, and she doubted that the worst gossip monger in the market still told the tale. Could it have been truth? In any case, what she did understand was more than enough. All honor the name of Arthur Hawkwing Suroth. The sharp-faced woman opened her mouth angrily, subsiding at the move of a blue-nailed finger by the high lady. But his time is long past.
Roll this one up since I already broke up
no land will
broke it up real
to
quick.
You or your empress. If you have taken some part of Taliban,
I'm gonna use
indrawn
some juicy days.
And her eyes glittered. Remember that it is a troubled land, divided against itself. Amadisia will not fall easily, and many nations will ride to her aid when they learn of you. Could it be true? However many you are, you will find no easy game for your spit. We have faced great threats before and overcome them. I advise you to make peace before you are crushed. Morghese remembered Saidar raging in the night, and avoided looking at the Damani, had she called them. By strong effort, she managed not to wet her lips. Suroth smiled that masked smile again, eyes shining like polished stones. All must make choices. Some will choose to obey, await and serve, and will rule their lands in the name of the Empress. May she live forever. She took a hand from her cup to gesture, a slight movement of long fingernails, and the sharp-faced woman barked, "Thera! Poses of the swan!" For some reason, Suroth's mouth tightened. "Not the swan, you blind fool," she hissed, half under her breath, though her accent made understanding difficult. The frozen smile returned in an instant. The serving woman rose from her place at the wall again, running out to the middle of the floor.
This one actually looked pretty cool.
On tiptoe, with her arms swept back. Slowly, atop the flaring golden sun, symbol of
snowflakes.
The light, she began a sort of stylized dance. Her arms unfolded to the sides like wings, then folded back. Twisting, she slid her left foot out, lowering herself over the bending knee, both arms outstretched as if appealing, until arms and body and right leg made a straight slanted line. Her sheer white robe made the whole thing scandalous. Morghese felt her cheeks growing hot as the dance, if it could be called that, continued. "Thera's new and not well trained yet," Suroth murmured. "The poses are most often done with 10 or 20 Dakovale together, men and women chosen for the clean beauty of their lines. But sometimes it is pleasant to view only one. It is very pleasant to own beautiful things, is it not?" Morghese frowned. How could anyone own a pose? Suroth had spoken earlier.
Hey, Soy, how you doing?
Property. She knew the old tongue, and the word Dakovale was not familiar to her, but thinking it out, she came up with person who is owned. It was disgusting, horrendous. "Incredible," she said dryly. "Perhaps I should leave you to enjoy the dance." "In one moment," Suroth said, smiling at the posture.
I hope you're doing good today, Soy.
We're
just rolling one up real quick.
Choices to make, as I said. The old king of Tarabon chose to rebel and died. The old Panarch was captured, yet refused the oath. Each of us has a place where we belong, unless raised by the Empress. But those who reject their proper place can also be cast down, even to the depths. Thera has a certain grace. Strangely, Alwyn shows great promise in teaching, so I expect that before many years, there
not
are
very big ones.
And the poses to go with her grace. That smile swiveled toward Morghese, that glittering gaze. her significant gaze, but why? Something to do with the dancer? Her name mentioned so often, as if to highlight it. But what? Morgaze's head whipped around, and she stared at the woman, up on her toes and slowly pivoting in one spot, with her hands flat together and arms stretched up as high as they would go. I don't believe it, she gasped. I won't. Thera, Suroth said. What was your name before you became my property? What title did you hold? Thera froze in her upstretched posture, quivering, shooting a look half panic, half terror at sharp-faced Alwyn, a look of pure terror at Suroth. Thera was called Amathera, if it pleases the High Lady, she said breathily. Thera was the Panarch of Tarabon, if it pleases the High Lady. The cup dropped from Morgaze's hand, smashing to bits on the floor, spraying the black calf. It had to be a lie. She had never met Amathera, but she had heard a description once. No. Many women of the right age could have large, dark eyes and a petulant mouth. Fura had never been eyes so down. And this woman... Pose, Alwyn snapped, and Thera flowed on without so much as one more glance at Suroth or anyone. Whoever she was, clearly the foremost thought in her head now was an urgent desire not to make a mistake. Morgaze concentrated on not vomiting. Suroth stepped very close, face cold as midwinter. All confront choices, she said quietly. Her voice could have marked steel. Some of my prisoners say that you spent time in the White Tower. By law, no Marath Darmani may escape the leash, but I pledge to you that you, who named me to my eyes and called lie on my word, you will not face that fate. The emphasis made quite clear that her pledge covered no other possible fate. The smile that never reached her eyes returned. I hope that you will choose to swear the oath, Morgaze, and rule Andor in the name of the Empress, may she live forever. For the first time, Morgaze was absolutely certain the woman lied. I will speak to you again tomorrow, or perhaps the next day, if I have time. Turning away, Suroth glided past the lone dancer to the high-backed chair. As she sat, spreading her robe gracefully, Alwyn barked again. She did not seem to have any other voice. All poses of the swan. The young men and women kneeling against the wall leaped forward to join Thera, joining her movements exactly in a line before Suroth's chair. Only the Lopar's gaze still acknowledged Morgaze's existence. She did not believe she had ever been dismissed so thoroughly in her life. Gathering her dignity with her skirts, she left. She did not go far alone, of course. Those red and black armored soldiers stood in the anteroom like statues with red and black tasseled spears, faces impassive in their lacquered helmets, hard eyes seeming to stare from behind the mandibles of monstrous...
There you go, sorry.
One, not much taller than she, fell in at her shoulder without a word and escorted her back to her rooms, where two Taraboners with swords flanked her door, these in steel breastplates, but still painted in horizontal stripes. They bowed low, hands on their knees, and she thought it was for her, until her escort spoke for the first time. Honor met, he said in a harsh, dry voice, and the Taraboners straightened, never glancing at her until he said, Watch her well. She has not given the oath. Dark eyes flickered toward her above steel veils, but their short bows of assent were for the Shan-Chan. She tried not to hurry inside, but once the door was closed behind her, she leaned against it, attempting to settle her whirling thoughts. Shan-Chan and Damani, empresses and oaths and people owned. Linny and Brianna stood in the middle of the room, looking at her. What did you learn? Linny asked patiently, in much the tone in which she had questioned the child Morgaze about a book read. Nightmares and madness, Morgaze sighed. Suddenly she stood up straight.
I hope you're doing good, sorry.
Where are the men? Brianna answered the unasked question in a dryly mocking tone. Talonor went to see what he could find out. Her fists
Cheers to you too, sorry. Hope you're doing well.
Lamgren went with him, and Master Gil. What did you find out? Who are these Seanchan? She said the name awkwardly, frowning around it. We heard that much for ourselves. She affected not to notice Linny's biting stare. What are we to do now, Morghese?
Finishing off this one real
Morghese
quick.
brushed between the women, crossing to the nearest window. Not as narrow as those in the audience chamber, it looked down 20 feet or more to the stone paving of the courtyard. A dispirited column of bare-headed, disheveled men, some with blood-stained bandages, shambled across the courtyard under the watchful gaze of Taraboners carrying spears. Several Seanchan stood atop a nearby tower, peering into the distance between the crenellations.
Oh, we're not doing too bad, so
One
you
wore
can't
a helmet
complain too
decorated
much.
with 3 slender plumes. A woman appeared in a window across the court, the lightning-embroidered red panel plain on her breast, frowning down at the white-cloaked prisoners. Those stumbling men looked stunned, unable to believe what had happened. What were they to do? A decision Morghese dreaded. It seemed that she had not made so much as a decision on fruit for breakfast in months, without it leading to disaster. A choice, Suroth had said. Aid these Seanchan in taking Andor, or one last service she could do for Andor. The tail end of the column appeared, followed by more Taraboners, who were joined by their countrymen they passed. A 20-foot fall, and Suroth lost her lever. Maybe it was the coward's way out, but she'd already proved herself. Still, the Queen of Andor should not die, so... Under her breath, she spoke the irrevocable words that had been used only twice before in the 1,000-year history of Andor. Under the light, I relinquish the high seat of House Trakand to Elaine Trakand. Under the light, I renounce the rose crown and abdicate the lion throne to Elaine, high seat of House Trakand. Under the light, I submit myself to the will of Elaine of Andor, her obedient subject. None of that made Elaine queen, true, but it cleared the way.
Let's do another
What are
dab.
you smiling at? Linny asked. Morghese turned slowly. I was thinking of Elaine. She did not think her old nurse had been close enough to hear what no one really needed to. Linny's eyes widened, though, and her breath caught. You come away from there now, she snapped, and suiting actions to words, seized her arm and physically pulled her from the window. Linny, you forget yourself. You stopped being my nurse a long... Morghese drew a deep breath and softened her tone. Meeting those frightened eyes was not easy. Nothing frightened Linny. What I do is for the best, believe me, she told her.
Use the most hated nectar collector.
No other way, Brianna broke in angrily, gripping her skirts till her hands shook. Clearly, she would rather have had them wrapped around Morghese's throat. What fool
it's made to where
spouting now? What if
you take this off, and you put this part in the freezer, let it freeze, take it out, put your tip back on, and do a dab, and be like taking a hit out of a rig or a water piece that you put ice in.
You hold your mouth, or I'll
he's
slap
letting
you
me
sillier than you are.
use his
Slap her
until
if you want to slap someone.
I can replace mine that broke.
Spittle flew. Queen Morghese, she will send you and me and my Lamgren to the gallows, and her precious Talonvor too, because she lacks the belly of a mouse. The door opened to admit Talonvor and put an abrupt end to it. No one was about to shout in front of him. Linny pretended to examine Morghese's sleeve as though it might need mending. As Master
I guess so, but you can see it's pretty much.
Brianna put on a bright smile and smoothed.
It's all twisted around, so watch your see. I still get especially since it has a wide titanium tip. There's a quartz one too, but I could judge the heat better with this than I can with the quartz one right now.
Before she could ask how, the skinny little man who brought up the rear closed the door. But as his eyes flicked and hair He knew what Balwar said. He has a plan to take us all out of here, Talonvor broke in.
There's a cold for a sec.
Now. He gave her a look not that of subject to queen. We are accepting his offer. How? She said slowly, forcing her leg. What help did this Christmas man offer? She wanted very much to know she was not going to. Talonvor looking at her in that fashion. Of course, she was not his queen now.
Still a little hot.
Another question occurred. Why? Master Balwar, I'll not shun any true offer of help, but why would you risk yourself? These Seanchan will make you regret it should they find out.
There we go. That was just the right time.
He said carefully. It seemed imprudent to leave Balder's hands. It's my way of repaying him. I know him. He hid himself down behind his hand. But the plan will work. These Seanchan actually make it easier. I would not have been ready for days yet without them. For a newly conquered city, they allow remarkable freedom to anyone willing to say their oath. Not an hour after sunrise, I obtained a pass allowing myself and up to 10 men who had taken the oath to depart outdoors. They believe I intend to wagons to carry. It must be a trap. The words tasted bitter. Better the window than falling into some snare. They won't allow you to carry word of them ahead of their army. Balwar's head tilted to one side, and he began dry washing his hands, then stopped abruptly. In truth, Majesty, I considered that. The officer who gave me the pass said it did not matter. His exact words, tell who you will what you have seen, and let them know they cannot stand against us. Your lands will know soon enough. I have seen several merchants take the oath this morning and depart with their wagons. Talonvor moved close to her, too close. She could almost feel his breath. She could feel his eyes. We are accepting his offer, he said, for her ears alone. If I must bind and gag you, I think he can find a way even so. He seems a very resourceful little fellow. She met him stare for stare. The window, or a chance. If Talonvor had only held his tongue, it would have been much easier to say, except with gratitude. But she said it. She stepped away as if to see Balwar without having to crane past Talonvor. It was always disturbing being so near to him. He was too young. What is to do first? I doubt those guards at the door will accept your pass for us. Balwar bowed his head as if acknowledging her foresight. I fear they must meet with accidents, Majesty. Talonvor eased his dagger in its scabbard, and Lamgwin flexed his hands, like the Lopar flexing its claws. She did not believe it could be so easy, even after they had packed up what they could carry and the 2 carabiners had been stuffed beneath her bed. At the main gates, holding her linen dust cloak close awkwardly because of the bundle on her back, she bowed, hands on her knees the way Balwar had shown her, while he told the guards that they had all sworn to obey, await, and serve. She thought of how to make sure she was not taken alive. It was not until they were actually out of Aldor, past the last guards, on the horses Balwar had had waiting, that she began to believe. Of course, Balwar probably expected some fine reward for rescuing the Queen of Andor. She had not told anyone that that was done with beyond going back. She knew she had spoken the words, and no one else needed to know. Regretting them was useless. Now she would see what sort of life she could find without a throne. A life far from a man who was much too young and much too disturbing. Why is your smile so sad? Linny asked, reining her slab-sided brown mare closer. The animal looked moth-eaten. Morghese's bay was no better. None of the horses were. The Seanchan might have been willing to let Balwar go with his pass, but not with decent money. There is a long road ahead, Morghese told her, and stumped her mare into some semblance of a trot after Talonvor.
These motherfuckers are still pushing it.
To be alone.
My bad, everyone.
Slipping the haft of his axe through the loop on his belt opposite his quiver, Perrin took his unstrung lance from the corner, slung his legs over his shoulder, and left the rooms he had shared with Fail without a backward look. They had been happy there, most of the time. He did not think he would ever be back. Sometimes he wondered whether being happy somewhere with Fail meant he would never return there. He hoped not. The servants he saw in the palace corridors wore unrelieved black livery. Perhaps Rand had ordered it, and perhaps the servants themselves had simply adopted it. They had been uneasy without livery, as though they did not know where they belonged, and black seemed safe as Rand's color because of the Ashaman. Those who saw Perrin scampered away as fast as they could, not waiting for any bows or curtsies. Fear scent drifted behind them. For once, his yellow eyes had nothing to do with anyone being afraid. It would not be safe to loiter near a man at whom the Dragon Reborn had unleashed his rage so publicly this very morning. Perrin eased the shoulder under his saddlebags. A long while had passed since anyone had been able to pick him up and throw him. Of course, no one had ever used the power to try before. One moment in particular stuck with him. He pushed himself up, holding his shoulder, sliding his back up the square column that had stopped his flight. He thought a few ribs might have cracked. Around the great hall of the sun, a scattering of nobles who had come to appeal one thing or another to Rand, tried to look anywhere else, tried to pretend they were anywhere else. Only Dobrain watched, shaking his gray head as Rand stalked across the throne room. "I will deal with the Aes Sedai as I choose," Rand shouted. "Do you hear me, Perrin? As I choose." "You've just handed them over to the wise ones," he growled back, shoving away from the column. "You don't know whether they're sleeping on silk or had their throats cut. You're not the creator." With a snarl of rage, Rand threw his head back. "I am the Dragon Reborn," he cried. "I don't care how they're treated. They don't." Stirred as Rand's eyes lowered from the vaulted ceiling. Blue ice would have been warm and soft beside them. The more so because they stared from a face twisted with pain. "Get out of my sight, Perrin. Do you hear me? Get out of Cairhien. Today. Now. I never want to see you again." Pivoting on his heel, he strode away with nobles all but throwing themselves to the floor as he passed. Perrin thumbed quickly into his mouth. For one moment there, he had been sure Rand was
said it like that to give it a rest, or...
Shaking his head to rid himself of the thought, he rounded a corner and nearly ran into Loial. With a large bundle strapped to his back and a grip big enough to hold his sheath slung on his shoulder, the Ogier was using his long-handled axe as a walking staff. The capacious pockets of his coat bulged with the shapes of books.
One second, everyone.
Warriors perked up beside of him, then suddenly drooped. His whole face, eyebrows hanging on his cheeks.
"I heard, Perrin,"
he boomed sadly.
"Rand should not have done that. Quick words make long troubles. I know he'll reconsider. Tomorrow, maybe."
"It's all right," Perrin told him. "Cairhien is too polished for me anyway. I'm a blacksmith, not a courtier. By tomorrow, I'll be a long way gone."
"You and Fail could come with me. Carlden and I are going to visit the steading, Perrin. All of them. About the Waygates."
A narrow-faced, pale-haired young fellow, standing behind Loial, stopped frowning at Perrin to frown at the Ogier. He had a scrip and a bundle, too, and a sword on his hip. Despite the blue coat, Perrin recognized one of the Ashaman. Carlden did not look pleased to recognize Perrin. Besides, his smell was cold and angry. Loial peered down the hallway behind Perrin.
"Where is Fail?"
"She's meeting me in the stables." That was simple truth. Fail seemed to like shouting sometimes. He lowered his voice. "Loial, I wouldn't talk about that where anyone could hear. The Waygates, I mean." Loial snorted hard enough to make a bull jump, but he did drop his tone.
I don't see anyone but us,
he rumbled. No one more than 2 or 3 paces beyond Carlton could have heard clearly. His ears lashed was the only word, and laid back angrily.
Everyone's afraid to be seen near you. After all you've done for Rand.
Carlton tugged at Loyal's sleeve. We have to go, he said, glaring at Perrin. Anyone the Dragon Reborn shouted at was outside the gate, so far as he was concerned. Perrin wondered whether he was holding the power right then.
Yes, yes,
Loyal murmured, waving a ham-sized hand, but he leaned on his axe, frowning pensively.
I don't like this, Perrin. Rand chases you away. He sends me off. How am I to finish my book?
His ears twitched and he coughed.
Well, that's neither here nor there. But you, me, and the light only knows where Matt is. He'll send Min away next. He hid from her this morning. He sent me out to tell her he wasn't there. I think she knew I was lying. He'll be alone then, Perrin. It's terrible to be alone. That's what he said to me. He is planning to send all of his friends away.
The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, Perrin said. Loyal blinked at that echo of Moraine. Perrin had been thinking of her a lot recently. She had been a restraining influence on Rand. Farewell, Loyal. Keep safe. And don't trust anyone you don't have to. He did not quite look at Carlton.
You don't mean that, Perrin.
Loyal sounded shocked. He seemed to trust everyone.
You cannot. Come with me, you and Fail.
We'll meet again one day, Perrin told him gently, and hurried past before he had to say more. He did not like lying, especially not to a friend. In the north stable, things were much the same as inside the palace. Grooms saw him walk in and dropped dung forks and curry combs, crowding out through small doors at the back. Rustles in the loft high above that might have escaped another's ears told of folk hiding there. He could hear anxious, fearful breaths. He brought Stepper out of a green-streaked marble stall, slipped on his bridle, and tied the dun stallion to a gilded hitching ring. He went to fetch blanket and saddle from a marble tack room, where half the saddles were mounted with silver or gold. The stable fit very well in a palace, with tall square marble columns and a marble floor, even under the straw in the stalls. He rode out, glad to see the back of grandeur. North of the city, he followed the road he had come down so desperately with Rand just a few days before. Rode until folds in the land hid Cairhien. Then he turned off to the east, where a fair patch of forest remained, running down one tall hill and over the next taller one. Just inside the trees, Fail booted Swallow to meet him, Aram heeling her like a hound on his own horse. Aram's face brightened at the sight of him, though that was not saying much. He merely divided his faithful hound looks between him and Fail. Husband, she said, not too coolly, but razor-sharp anger and spiky jealousy still threaded through the clean scent of her and her herbal soap. She was garbed for travel, with a thin dust cloak hanging down her back, and red gloves that matched the boots peeking up beneath the dark, narrow riding skirts she favored. No fewer than 4 sheathed daggers were tucked behind her belt. Movement behind her turned into Bane and Chiad, and Sullivan with a dozen more maidens. Perrin's eyebrows rose. He wondered what Gaul thought of that. The Aielman had said he was looking forward to getting Bane and Chiad alone. Even more surprising were Fail's other companions. What are they doing here? He nodded toward a small cluster who held their horses back. He recognized Salanda and Camail, and the tall Tyrant woman, all still in men's clothes and wearing swords. The blocky fellow in a fat-sleeved coat, who had kept his beard oiled and trimmed to a point despite wearing his hair tied back with a ribbon, also looked familiar. The other 2 men, both Cairhienin, he did not know, but he could guess, by their youth and the ribbon tying their hair if nothing else, that they were part of Salanda's society. I took Salanda and a few of her friends into my service. Bail spoke lightly, but suddenly she gave off foggy waves of caution. They would have gotten themselves into trouble in the city sooner or later. They need someone to give them direction. Think of them as charity. I won't let them get under your feet. Baron sighed and scratched his beard. A wise man did not tell his wife to her face that she was hiding things, especially when that wife was Fail. She was going to be as formidable as her mother, if she was not already. Under his feet. How many of these puppies had she taken on? Is everything ready? Pretty soon some idiot back there will decide he can curry favor by bringing Rand my head. I'd like to be gone before that. Aram growled in his throat. No one is going to take your head, husband. Fail showed white teeth and went on in a whisper she knew he would catch. Except perhaps me. In a normal voice, she said, All is ready. In a clear, fairly flat hollow beyond the trees, the two rivers men stood beside their horses, a column of twos that wound out of sight around the side of the hill. Perrin sighed again. The red wolf-head banner and the red eagle of Manetheren stirred slightly in a hot breeze at the head of the column. Maybe another dozen maidens squatted on their heels near the banners. On the other side, Gaul wore as close to a sullen expression as Perrin had ever seen on an Aiel. As he dismounted, two black-coated men came to him, saluting with fist pressed to heart. Lord Perrin, Jer Grady said, we've been here since last night. We are ready. Grady's weathered farmer's face made Perrin almost comfortable with him. But Phaedra Neild was another matter. Maybe 10 years younger than Grady, he might have been a farmer too, for all Perrin knew, but he affected airs and graces and wore his pitiful mustache waxed to a semblance of points. Where Grady was one of the dedicated, he was a soldier, without the silver sword pinned to his collar, but that did not hold him back from speaking. Lord Perrin, is it really necessary to take those women with us? They'll be nothing but trouble. They will. The whole lot of them, and you know it well. Some of
Do another dab before I finish this.
The rivers men, shawls looped over their arms. Idara appeared the eldest of the 6 wise ones, impassively watching the two women Neild had nodded to. In truth, that pair worried Perrin as well. Sionit Baigan, coolness and reserve in green silk, had been hotly criticised the Aiel woman. Most Carian, who were pretending to be Aiel, despised them. But when she saw Perrin, she shifted her day's reins to the other hand and gave Masuri Sakara a nudge in the ribs. Masuri started. Perrin seemed to go off in daybreak, stared at the green sister blankly, then directed her stare at Perrin. This one was more the sort she might have given some peculiar and perhaps dangerous animal. One she intended to be sure of before she was done. They had sworn to obey Randall Thor, but how would they do obeying Perrin Ebar? Giving orders to Aes Sedai seemed unnatural, but better than the other way around at least. Everybody comes, Perrin said. Let's be gone before we are seen. Fael sniffed. Grady and Neild saluted again and strode out to the middle of the treeless area. Perrin had no idea which of them did what was necessary, but suddenly the now familiar silvery vertical flash in the air rotated not quite tall enough to ride through. The opening, not that much different from those on the surrounding hills. Grady strode through immediately, but even so, he was nearly knocked down by Sulin and a small horde of veiled maidens. They seemed to have taken the honor of being first through a gateway for themselves, and were not about to let anyone usurp it. Foreseeing 100 problems he had not thought of, Perrin led Stepper through into a land not so hilly. There was no clearing, but it was not so thickly treed as the hollow back in Carian either. The scattered trees were taller, but just as sere, even the pines. He did not recognize much else except the air seemed a little hotter. Fael followed him, but when he turned to the left, with Swallow right. Aram's head swung wordly between them until Perrin nodded toward his wife. The one-time tinker hauled his gelding after her, but quick as he was not before Bane and Chiad, still veiled. And, for all Perrin's orders that the Two Rivers men were to be next, Salanda and a good 24 young Carianan and Tyrants poured out of the gateway, drawing their horses along. 24. Shaking his head, Perrin stepped beside Grady, who turned this way and that, studying the sparse woodland. Gaul came stalking up as Daniel finally began leading the Two Rivers men out at a run, pulling their horses. Those bloody banners appeared right behind Daniel, going up as soon as they were clear. The men ought to shave those fool mustaches. Women are beyond any belief, Gaul muttered. Ben Fail before he realized it must be Bane and Chiad the man was glaring at. Do you have a wife, Grady? Nora, Grady answered absently, his attention still on the surrounding trees. Perrin would have wagered he held the power now, for sure. Anyone could see a long way in this compared to any woods back home, but someone could still sneak up on you. She's missing me, Grady went on, almost to himself. You learned to recognize that one right off. I wish I knew why her knee hurts, though. Her knee hurts, Perrin said flatly. Right this minute it hurts. Grady seemed to realize he was staring, and Gaul was too. He blinked, but went right back to his study. Forgive me, Lord Perrin. I need to keep a watch. For a long moment he said nothing, then began slowly. It's something a fellow named Candler worked out. The Mahale doesn't like us trying to figure out things on our own, but once it was done... His slight grimace said perhaps Taim had not been all that easy about it even then. We think maybe it's something like the bond between Waters and Aes Sedai. Maybe 1 in 3 of us is married. Anyway, that's how many wives stayed instead of running off when they learned what their husbands were. This way, when you're apart from her, you know she's all right and she knows you are. A man likes to know his wife's safe. That he does, Perrin said. What was Fail up to with those fools? She was mounted on Swallow now, and they were all standing close around looking up at her. He would not put it past her to leap into this Giotto nonsense herself. Sioned and Masuri glided behind the last of the Two Rivers men with the 3 warders they had between them, and the wise ones right behind them, which was no surprise. They were along to keep an eye on the Aes Sedai. Sioned gathered her reins as if to mount, but Idara said something in a low voice, pointing to a fat, lopsided oak, and the 2 Aes Sedai looked at her, heads swiveling as one, then exchanged glances and led their horses to the tree. Matters would go a deal smoother if that pair was always so meek. Well, not meek exactly. Sioned's neck was stiff as a rod. After that came the remounts, a herd of spare horses tied 10 to a lead, under the watchful eyes of folk from Dobrain's estates, who supposedly knew what they were about. Perrin automatically picked out Stayer, on a lead by himself. The woman taking care of him better know what she was doing. A great many high-wheeled supply carts came through, drivers tugging the horses and shouting as if they feared the gateway might close on them. A great many because carts could not carry as much as wagons, and carts because a wagon and team would not fit through the gateway. It seemed neither Neil nor Grady could make one as big as Rand could, or Toshiba. When the last cart finally trundled out on a squealing axle, Perrin considered ordering the gateway closed right then. But Neil was the man holding the thing open, and him on the other side of it back in Kyrian. A moment later, it was too late. Berelain strode through, leading a mare as white as Swallow was black, and he offered up small thanks that her gray riding dress had a neck right to her chin. On the other hand, from the waist up, it fit as snugly as any Terravana dress. Perrin groaned. With her came Norella and Bertain Galena, the Lord Captain of her winged guards, a gray-haired fellow who wore his black eye patch as another man might a plume in his hat. And then the red-armored winged guards themselves, more than 900 of them. Norella and the rest who had been at Dumai's Wells wore a yellow cord tied high in the left arm. Climbing onto her mare, Berelain rode off to one side with Felena, while Nirella formed the wind guards among the trees. There must have been 50 paces between her and Fail, and dozens of trees, but she placed herself where they could stare at each other. Stare with so little expression that Perrin's skin crawled. Putting Berelain at the rear, as far from Fail as he could manage, it seemed a good notion, but he was going to face this every bloody evening. Berbrand. Now Neil popped out of the gateway, stroking his ridiculous mustache and grinning for anyone who might be watching as the opening vanished. No one was, and he climbed down to his horse with a disgruntled expression. Mounting Stepper, Perrin rode to a slight rise. Not everyone could see him because of the trees, but it was enough they could hear. A stir ran through the assemblage as he reined in, people shifting for a better look. As far as anyone's eyes and ears back in Cairhien know, he said loudly, I've been banished. The First of Mayenne is on her way back home, and the rest of you have just disappeared like fog in the sun. To his surprise, they laughed. A cry of Perrin Golden Eyes went up, and not just from the Two Rivers folk. He waited for it to quiet. That took a while. Fail neither laughed nor shouted, nor did Berelain. Each woman shook her head. Neither believed he should tell as much as he intended to. Then they saw each other, and those shaking heads froze as if trapped in amber. They did not like agreeing. It was no surprise when their eyes swung to him with identical expressions. There was an old saying in the Two Rivers, though how you said it and what you meant depended on circumstance and who you were. It's always a man's fault. One thing he had learned women were better at than anything else, teaching a man to sigh. Some of you may be wondering where we are and why, he went on when silence fell at last. A smaller ripple of laughter. This is Ghealdan. Murmurs of awe and maybe disbelief at having crossed 1,500 miles or more in a step. The first thing we have to do is convince Queen Aleandra we aren't here to invade. Berelain was supposed to trust, and Fail was going to give him fits for it. Then we're going to find a fellow who calls himself the Prophet of the Lord Dragon. That would not be much pleasure either. Masema had been no joy before he tipped over the edge. This prophet has been causing some problems, but we're going to let him know Randall Thor doesn't want anybody frightened into following him, and we'll take him and any of his people who want to come back to the Lord Dragon. And we'll frighten the britches off Masema to do it if need be, he thought wryly. They cheered. They whooped and shouted that they would march this prophet back to Cairhien for the Lord Dragon, till Perrin hoped this spot was even farther from any village than it was supposed to be. Even the cart drivers and horse handlers joined in. More than that, he prayed that everything went smoothly and quickly. The sooner he could put as much distance as possible between Berelain and himself and Fail, the better. No surprises. That was what he wanted once they rode south. It was about time his being Ta'veren showed itself good for something. Chapter 28. Bread and Cheese. Mat knew he was in trouble from the day he moved into the Tarasin Palace. He could have refused. Just because the flaming dice started or stopped did not mean he had to do anything. Usually when they stopped spinning, it was too late not to do something. The problem was, he wanted to know why. Before very many days, he wished he had taken his curiosity by the throat and throttled it. After Nynaeve and Elaine left his room, once he could manage to reach
Hey,
his feet
just
without
chilling.
his head
How you
falling
doing,
off,
bro?
he spread the word among his
Same old, just
Nobody seemed to see the disadvantage.
smoking.
He just wanted to
chilling.
prepare them, but nobody listened. Very good, my lord, Nera murmured, tucking Mat's boot onto his foot. My lord will finally have decent rooms. Oh, very good. For a moment, he seemed to lose his mournful expression. For just a moment. I will brush the red silk coat for my lord. My lord has stained the blue rather badly with wine. Matt waited impatiently, put on the coat, and headed down.
Yeah, you can say that.
Aes Sedai.
And there's also my main one.
His round-bellied manservant, Lopen, was hovering behind him.
Yeah, this actually came from Gigi's brother, Merle. And
Matt winced. Bad enough the man could drink a barrel of brandy with no effect the next morning.
there's other
But did he have to
Gigi Allen's on this one. This I made for someone that
Now we can forget
shit happened, and yeah.
With our own kind. He meant nobles, the only ones who could afford to play.
But that one's
Merchants who now remain well-to-do.
I actually have that one posted on Facebook for sale. This whole
Elysian
vest.
rubbed his hands briskly while Lopen tried to settle the places. Even his
Yeah, but I know Gigi.
Silk sheets, he murmured. Who ever heard of silk sheets? Those old memories nudged, but Matt refused to listen.
Oh yeah, he was definitely a sick fuck, but
Full of nobles, Bannon growled.
I still like some of his music, and
To spit. His glance searching for Mr.
I can't say I like Gigi.
Automatic now. He decided instead to swallow from the mug of rough wine that was his breakfast.
That's an old school
See the Lady Elaine again.
punk rocker there.
His breathing rose as if knuckle his forehead.
I actually got
the gesture. Matt
one in my closet in my dresser.
ruined a good man.
It's a stack of
You want me to look in on Carmen
DVDs
again?
about
Went on.
yay big. I can't remember how many's in
His
there.
street's so full of beggars, it's hard to see
I think like 15, 20
But he had
DVDs
an awful lot
of
folk come to call.
most of like
Matt thought that would be
Gigi
fine.
Allen's
No wonder
shows
Matt
on
didn't care
DVD.
whether the palace was full of nobles and
And
Aes Sedai.
every
He was
single
one
one
day
of them is
swaying in the
signed
sun, jostled by the
by
crowds.
Merle Allen, Gigi's brother.
There was no point trying to warn Hanan and the rest of the Red Arms, all shoveling down
Yeah.
white porridge and tiny
When
black
I
sausages,
die.
while they nudged one another in the ribs and laughed about the serving women in the palace, who they had heard were all chosen for their beauty and remarkably free with their favors.
Watch. Since you know about Gigi,
Themselves.
let me grab this vinyl out
Things
that
did
I
not
got.
get any better when they went into the kitchen searching for Mr. Anand to settle the bill. Kyra was there, but with all her bad temper of the night before, doubled. She stuck out her lower lip, glowering at him, and stalked out the door to the stable yard, rubbing the back of her skirt. Maybe she had gotten herself into some misery or other, but how she could blame Matt Coughlin was beyond him. Mistress Anand was out, it seemed. She was always on the soup kitchens for refugees
Damn
or
it.
leaping into some other good work. But Enid was waving a long wooden spoon at her scurrying helpers, ready to take his coin in her stout hand. You squeeze too many melons, my young lord, and you shouldn't be surprised when a rotten one breaks in your hand, she said darkly for some reason.
Here we go.
Or two, she added after a moment, nodding. She leaned close, tilting up her sweating round face with an intense stare. You'll only make trouble for yourself if you say a word. You won't. That did not sound like a question. Not a word, Matt said. What in the light was she talking about? It seemed the right response, though, because she nodded and waddled away, waving that spoon twice as vigorously as before. For a moment, he had thought she meant to thump him with it. The pure truth was, women all had a violent streak, not just some of them. One thing and another, it was a relief when Narum and Lopen got into a shouting match over whose master's
shit.
baggage would be carried over first. Smoothing their feathers required a good
I
half an
forgot
hour
I had
to be
this.
seen both. A manservant with his dander ruffled would make your life miserable. Then he had to settle which of the Red Arms
Signed by
would
Merle.
have the honor of lugging the chest of gold across, and which were to take the horses. Anyway, it was that much longer outside the bloody tiresome palace. Once he was ensconced in his new rooms, though, he almost forgot troubles at first. He had a large sitting room and a small, what they called a sulking room hereabouts, and an immense bedchamber with the biggest bed he had ever seen, the massive bedposts carved with entwined flowers of all things and painted red. Most of the furniture was bright red or bright blue, where it was not layered with gilt. A small door near the bed led to a cramped room for Narum, which the fellow seemed to think was excellent despite a narrow bed and no window. Matt's rooms all had tall arched windows letting onto white wrought iron balconies that overlooked the Mulhara. The stand lamps were gilded, and so were the mirror frames. There were 2 mirrors in the sulking room, 3 in the sitting room, and 4 in the bedchamber. The clock, a clock, on the marble mantel above the fireplace in the sitting room sparkled with gilt as well. The wash basin and pitcher were red Seafolk porcelain. He was almost disappointed to discover that the chamber pot under the bed was only plain white pottery. There was even a shelf in the large sitting room with a full dozen books. Not that he read much. Even given the jarring colors of walls and ceilings and floor tiles, the rooms shouted rich. Any other time, he would have danced a jig. Any time when he was not aware that a woman with chambers right down the hall wanted to stick him in hot water and put a bellows to the fire. If Teslin or Melilla or one of that lot did not manage it first, despite his medallion. Why had the dice in his head stopped tumbling as soon as Elaine mentioned these bloody rooms? Curiosity. He had heard a saying on several women's lips back home, usually when he had done something that looked fun at the time. Men teach cats curiosity, but cats keep sense for themselves. I'm no bloody cat, he muttered, stalking out of the bedchamber into the sitting room. He just had to know. That was all. Of course you're not a cat, Tylan said. You're a succulent little duckling is what you are. Matt gave a startled stare. Duckling? And a little duckling at that. The woman stood well short of his shoulder. Indignation or no indignation, he managed an elegant bow anyway. She was the queen. He had to remember that. Majesty, thank you for these wonderful apartments. I'd love to talk with you, but I have to go out and... Smiling, she advanced across the red and green floor tiles, layered blue and white silk petticoats swishing, large dark eyes fixed on him. He had no desire at all to look at the marriage knife nestled in her generous cleavage, or the larger, gem-studded dagger thrust behind an equally gem-studded belt. He backed away. Majesty, I have an important... She started humming. He recognized the tune. He had hummed it to a few girls lately. He was wise enough not to try actually singing with his voice, and besides, the words they used in Abu Dar would have singed his ears. Around here, they called it, I will steal your breath with kisses. Laughing nervously, he tried to put a lapis inlaid table between them, but she somehow got around it first without seeming to increase her speed. Majesty, She laid a hand flat on his chest, back-heeled him into a high-backed chair, and plunked herself down on his lap. Between her and the chair arms, he was trapped. Oh, he could have picked her up and set her on her feet quite easily, except that she did have that bloody big dagger in her belt, and he doubted his manhandling her would be as acceptable to her as her manhandling him seemed to be. This was Abu Dar, after all, where a woman killing a man was justified until proven otherwise. He could have picked her up easily, except he had seen fishmongers in the city selling peculiar creatures called squid and octopus. Abu Dari actually ate the things. But they had nothing on Tylan. The woman possessed 10 hands. He thrashed about, vainly trying to fend her off, and she laughed softly. Between kisses, he breathlessly protested that someone might walk in, and she just chuckled. He babbled his respect for her crown, and she chortled. He claimed betrothal to a girl back home who held his heart in her hands. She really laughed at that. What she does not know cannot harm her, she murmured, her 20 hands not slowing for an instant. Someone knocked at the door. Prying his mouth free, he shouted, "Who is it?" Well, it was a shout. A high-pitched shout. He was out of breath, after all. Tylan was off his lap, and 3 paces away so fast it seemed she was just here, then there. The woman had the nerve to give him a reproachful look, and then she made a kiss at him. That barely left her lips before the door opened, and Tom stuck his head in.
Matt? I wasn't sure that was you. Oh. Matt
For a scrawny old gleeman with pretensions, Tom could flourish a bow at the best in spite of his limp. Julian could not, but he snatched off his ridiculous red hat and did what he could.
Forgive us. We won't disturb.
Tom began, but Matt broke in hurriedly. Come in, Tom. Snatching his coat back on all the way, he started to stand, then realized that somehow the bloody woman had untied the waist of his breeches without him noticing. These two might miss that his shirt was undone to his belly, but they would not miss his breeches falling off. Tylen's blue dress was not mussed at all. Julian, come in. I'm glad you find the rooms acceptable, Master Cawthon, Tylen said. Dignity in except for her eyes, anyway. When she stood so Tom and Julian could not see them. Her eyes laced innocuous words with added meaning. I look forward to having your company with pleasure. I shall find it interesting, having a Taviran where I can reach out and touch him at will. But I must leave you to your friends now. No, do not stand. Please. That with just the hint of a mocking smile.
Well, boy,
Tom said, knuckling his mustaches when she was gone,
there's luck for you.
being welcomed with open arms by the Queen herself. Julian became very interested in his cap. Matt eyed them warily, mentally daring them to say a word more. Just one word. But once he asked after Nynaeve and Elaine, he quit worrying what they suspected. The women were not back. He almost leaped up, breeches or no. They were trying to wiggle out of their agreement already. He had to explain what he meant in between their outbursts of incredulity, in between expressing his opinions of Nynaeve Bloody Almira and Elaine Bloody Daughter Heir. Not much chance they would have gone off to the Rahad without him. But he would not put it past them to try their hand spying on Karadin. Elaine would demand a confession and expect the man to break down. Nynaeve would try to beat one out of him. I doubt they are bothering Karadin, Julian said, scratching behind his ear. I believe Avienda and Brigitte are taking a look at him, from what I heard. We didn't see them go. I do not think you need to worry about him knowing what he's seeing, even if he walks right by them. Tom, pouring himself a golden goblet of wine punch that Matt had found waiting, took up the explanation. Matt put a hand over his eyes. Disguises made with the power. No wonder that...
Alright, everyone. Probably gonna call it into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by and chilling with me. Definitely appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.